different things like that, like things you would never think of, crazy stuff. We said yes a lot to mostly everything and everywhere.
For 3 decades, Jon Bon Jovi and Richie Sambora were the lifeblood of one of rock's biggest bands. They were 2 New Jersey kids who transformed ambition and grit into global stadium anthems. On stage, they seemed inseparable, their voices and instruments harmonizing with a chemistry fans thought could never be broken. But behind the scenes, fissures began to appear. Quiet decisions, shifting allegiances, and private conversations changed everything. Now, after years of silence, Richie is sharing his side of the story, revealing what truly happened between him and Jon, and why the real story is more complex than people think. Long before they played arenas or went on world tours, Richie Sambora and Jon Bon Jovi were just 2 ambitious kids from New Jersey. Both were shaped by their working-class roots. Richie from Woodbridge, and Jon from Saraville. In the early 80s, they shared the same impossible goal: to break free from the local club scene and make it big. Jon was with the Wild Ones, and Richie with bands like Message, both honing their skills in VFW halls, dive bars, and local gigs. They connected in 1983 not just through ambition, but through a mutual love for music that told stories and stirred emotions, inspired by Bruce Springsteen's heartfelt tales and Led Zeppelin's raw power. When Richie officially joined Bon Jovi that year, the band had just secured a record deal, but something was still missing. Richie's arrival was a game-changer. His blues-infused solos and natural chemistry with Jon elevated the band's sound from promising to legendary. He didn't just play guitar, he helped shape the songs, weaving in harmonies that gave them their powerful, anthemic quality while keeping them emotionally grounded. Tracks like Livin' on a Prayer, with its talkbox solo, Wanted Dead or Alive, with its brooding riffs, and I'll Be There For You, with its aching sincerity, weren't just hits. They were the result of a unique creative partnership. Offstage, their friendship was just as strong, built on backstage laughs, shared hotel rooms, and endless nights on the road. Despite their bond, the spotlight always shone more brightly on Jon, the band's designated frontman. Richie, even while co-writing some of their biggest songs, was often a step behind in the public eye. In those early years, it didn't seem to matter. What they had was special, and the music spoke for itself. By the mid to late 80s, Bon Jovi had cemented its place as a global rock powerhouse, and Richie Sambora was the heart of that sound. He wasn't just playing guitar parts, he was imbuing every song with its own voice through his playing. While Jon Bon Jovi delivered the powerful vocals that dominated radio, Richie's guitar lines carried just as much emotional weight. His style blended soulful blues with arena rock confidence, avoiding the empty flash of many 80s glam metal acts. He played for the song, not his ego. Albums like Slippery, When Wet, and New Jersey became the standard for radio-friendly rock that still had substance. Richie's harmonies on songs like Never Say Goodbye and I'll Be There For You didn't just fill out the chorus, they elevated it to anthem status. He had a natural talent for knowing when to hold back, when to let his guitar breathe, and when to unleash a solo that could ignite an entire stadium. This wasn't just technical skill, it was storytelling through music. Behind the scenes, Richie's contributions were equally crucial. He was deeply involved in the arrangements, often shaping songs in ways that gave them their timeless appeal. His instinct for balancing melody with raw energy kept Bon Jovi's sound authentic, even as image-driven trends swirled around them. Yet, while insiders and dedicated fans recognized his influence, the broader public narrative consistently portrayed Jon as the sole architect of the band's success. For Richie, this imbalance wasn't yet a deal-breaker, but it planted the first seeds of discomfort. The creative process was still a collaboration, but the hierarchy was clear. Jon was the frontman, the brand, the voice the world associated with Bon Jovi. Richie was the backbone, the emotional core, and the co-writer whose fingerprints were on their biggest hits. His role wasn't equally celebrated at the time, but he let it go. The music was great, their bond was strong, and the fans still felt the magic. However, a subtle shift was occurring within their partnership, and Richie could sense it. As the 90s turned into the 2000s, Bon Jovi's place in rock history was secure. They had survived changing musical trends, adapted their sound, and continued to sell out stadiums worldwide. But inside the band, small cracks were widening. Jon Bon Jovi's role as the face and primary decision-maker was no longer just about image. It had become the band's operational reality. For Richie Sambora, who had once been an equal in shaping the band's creative vision, the change was hard to ignore. The pressure of maintaining global success was relentless, with constant touring, demanding recording schedules, and the weight of industry and fan expectations. Over time, Richie began to feel his voice in the creative process was losing its weight. In the past, writing a new album meant he and Jon would sit down and hash out songs together, just as they had for decades. By the early 2000s and 2010s, that dynamic had changed. The breaking point arrived during sessions for what would become Bon Jovi's next album, following Richie's 2012 solo release, Aftermath of the Lowdown. Returning from his solo tour, Richie expected to jump back into their old songwriting rhythm. Instead, Jon informed him that he and session guitarist John Shanks had already written about 30 songs without him. Richie was stunned, not only by the amount of material, but by how foreign it felt from the Bon Jovi sound they had built together. It didn't sound like the band. Richie would later say, "It sounded like every song I didn't want to write." That moment shook him. The partnership that had created Livin' on a Prayer, Wanted Dead or Alive, and I'll Be There for You now felt one-sided. The creative synergy was gone, replaced by a process Richie hadn't been invited to join. On top of that, he was grappling with personal issues, struggles with addiction, the emotional fallout from his divorce from Heather Locklear, and the urgent need to be a present father to his daughter Ava. The road, once a source of camaraderie and purpose, was beginning to feel toxic. He continued to play his part for a while longer, touring and showing up for the fans, but the emotional connection to the band was fading. Every decision that sidelined his input chipped away at the trust that had once held their partnership together. It wasn't a sudden explosion, it was a slow, quiet corrosion, and Richie could feel it eating away at his creative spirit and his place in the band. In April 2013, Bon Jovi's Because We Can world tour was in full swing, selling out arenas night after night. The 120-person crew was ready for the next show in Calgary. Fans were filling their seats, and the band was preparing backstage. Then came the moment no one anticipated. Richie Sambora simply wasn't there. No phone call, no warning, just an empty spot where his guitar should have been. The official statement cited personal reasons, but behind that vague phrase was a complex mix of exhaustion, frustration, and a need for self-preservation. Years of feeling creatively marginalized had drained him. The joy of performing had been replaced by a grind that left him spiritually depleted. At the same time, his daughter Ava was entering her teenage years, and he knew he couldn't get that time back. The non-stop touring schedule had already kept him away for too long, and the thought of missing more of her life was unbearable. For fans, his absence was immediate and jarring. Jon Bon Jovi pulled double duty that night, handling both lead vocals and guitar before bringing in Phil X, who had filled in for Richie in 2011, to take over for the rest of the tour. But for Richie, the real blow came later. When he found out through the internet, not a conversation, that the band had officially moved on without him. "It was like I disappeared and nobody even called," he later admitted. This wasn't an impulsive tantrum or a fight over money. As Richie would explain years later, it was about survival, mentally, emotionally, and as a father. Still, he acknowledged that disappearing like that left a trail of confusion and hurt. "I don't regret leaving the situation," he said, "but I regret how I did it. It was the kind of exit that left no room for closure, only a void where one of rock's most iconic partnerships used to be." For Jon, the moment was equally unsettling. He later described it as a shock and a disappointment, remembering how the band had to carry on with 80 more shows scheduled. In his view, there was never a fight, just an absence they had to adapt to. But for Richie, it marked the end of an era. a quiet severing of a bond that had once seemed unbreakable. In the years that followed Richie Sambora's abrupt departure, there was no public feud or tabloid war of words, just silence. Jon Bon Jovi continued with the band, recording albums and touring with Phil X in Richie's place, while Richie focused on raising his daughter and quietly working on solo projects. But beneath the silence, his absence was felt. Fans endlessly speculated, holding out hope for a reunion, while both men avoided giving direct answers. For Jon, the situation was unresolved but not hostile. In interviews, he consistently maintained there was nothing but love and no fight to cause the split. Yet, he admitted that the manner of Richie's departure had been a shock and that the void it left onstage was undeniable. The true magic of our live performance was when we sang together. Jon later reflected. That was our unique spot. I don't think that's been replaced. For Richie, it took more than a decade to fully address what happened. In 2024, during promotions for Hulu's docuseries Thank You, Goodnight, the Bon Jovi story, he finally offered a direct apology. I just disappeared, man. I ghosted, he said candidly. I probably should have talked to Jon. I should have explained it better. He emphasized that his decision to leave was about protecting his mental health and being present for his daughter, not about money or petty disagreements. Still, he admitted the way he handled it had left people in the dark, and for that, he was sorry. But Jon wasn't blindsided by the apology. On the Howard Stern show, he said he saw it as Richie coming clean for the fans, finally putting to rest rumors of a backstage fight. But while the apology may have softened the public narrative, it didn't erase a decade of distance. A private meeting between the two, when Richie visited Jon with a birthday gift and sat down to watch the docuseries, reportedly ended awkwardly. According to a source, Richie left after the third episode, unhappy with how his departure was portrayed. He didn't like the way he was being cast, the source stated, adding that Richie made it clear that the currency of happiness is more important than the currency of money. The apology may have closed a chapter for the public, but for Richie, it was also a way of reclaiming his own story. It wasn't about rejoining the band, it was about making peace with the past on his own terms. For fans, the idea of Richie Sambora and Jon Bon Jovi sharing a stage again feels like the perfect ending to a rock and roll story. Two old friends setting aside the past, picking up their instruments and reigniting the magic. But for the men who actually lived that story, reality is far more complicated. More than a decade has passed since Richie left, and in that time, both he and Jon have evolved in ways that make a reunion unlikely. Creatively, they now walk different paths. Richie's post, Bon Jovi life has been defined by balance, fatherhood, and personal fulfillment. His music leans toward blues and soul with a stripped-down, introspective style that reflects where he is today. Jon, meanwhile, has steered the band into a more adult contemporary rock sound, a world away from the high, gloss hair metal energy that once defined them. Forcing those two directions back together risks losing the authenticity each has worked hard to cultivate. Health has also become a critical factor. Jon underwent vocal cord surgery in 2022 after years of struggling to sing at his old range. His recovery has been slow, and he has admitted that the voice that carried him through decades of stadium shows may never fully return. A grueling reunion tour with its demands and expectations would be a gamble, both for his health and for the band's reputation. Richie, too, is more selective now, avoiding projects that would put his well-being at risk. Then there's the emotional weight of their history. The bond that once made them musical brothers was eroded not by one explosive fight, but by years of small fractures, creative disagreements, shifting priorities, and unspoken frustrations. Those wounds may have scarred over, but rebuilding the trust required to work together at the highest level would take more than nostalgia. Jon has been candid about where he stands. "We had our run," he told the Sunday Times with a sense of calm finality. He's focused on the present, on creating new music with the band as it is now, and on living a life that no longer revolves around chasing past glory. Richie, for his part, has found peace outside the constant touring machine, pouring his energy into his relationship with his daughter and pursuing music on his own terms. The fans may keep dreaming, but for Jon Bon Jovi and Richie Sambora, the reunion has already happened. It's in the memories, the music, and the legacy they built together. What comes next will be separate chapters in the same remarkable story. Richie Sambora may never return to Bon Jovi, but the truth he's shared after all these years has given fans a new perspective on their history. Some see heartbreak, others see closure. But everyone can agree the music they made together still stands the test of time. What's your favorite Richie Sambora moment with Bon Jovi? Share it in the comments, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and keep the conversation going.